Days after a surprise terrorist onslaught destroys the World Trade Center and leaves the Pentagon badly damaged, the military prepares to mobilize up to 50,000 reservists for homeland defense.
This nation is peaceful, but fierce when stirred to anger.
While investigators gain ground, officials say some would-be terrorists remain in the U.S. We'll hear from our correspondents on the investigation and on the preparations for war. As Congress gives the go-ahead, we'll speak live with Senators Carl Levin and John Warner, and with reservists who are preparing to part from their families. We'll see the spirit of America at Ground Zero, where heroic rescue efforts continue. And we'll hear from families desperately seeking word on loved ones, among the thousands buried in the rubble. And in what the president calls the middle hour of our grief, we'll speak with Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, Archbishop of Washington, and Cardinal Edward Egan, Archbishop of New York.
But how do we understand something like this? Why does God allow evil like this to take place?
Good evening, I'm Wolf Blitzer reporting tonight from Washington.
And I'm Greta Van Susteren.
Behind me, the Capitol, where Congress is providing emergency funding and support for a tough U.S. response to terror.
And behind me, the White House, where the president began a day marked by prayer and a spirit-boosting trip to New York's Ground Zero. In the distance, the Pentagon, wounded but ready to fight back.
Grim determination, a search for solace, and a show of solidarity. Day 4 of America's new war. CNN Washington Bureau Chief Frank Sesno takes us through this day.
As an early morning rain fell on rescue workers and complicated their search for victims and clues, the nation turned to a day of patriotism
This conflict was begun on the timing and terms of others. It will end in a way and at an hour of our choosing.
Of prayer.
All people of faith want to say to this nation and to the world that love is stronger than hate.
And of taking stock of its lingering pain.
The casualties are in there. It's pretty much the worst thing you can imagine to see.
At this point, after not finding any news, we are very desperate.
3 days after the terrorist attacks, President Bush begins the day by activating 35,000 reservists. At 10:15 a.m., CNN learns the names of 19 suspected hijackers who were aboard the 4 ill-fated planes. The FBI makes the list public by mid-afternoon. In Congress, approval for a $40 billion plan to fund recovery and counterterrorism efforts. And it moves to strengthen the president's hand, nearing final approval for a resolution calling for the use of all necessary and appropriate force against those responsible for the attacks. By 3 p.m., CNN's David Ensor quotes U.S. officials as saying there may still be people inside the U.S. looking to commit acts of terrorism. 4 p.m., under heavy security, President Bush arrives at Ground Zero to see firsthand the devastation of what was once the World Trade Center. He thanks the weary rescue crews and makes an emotional pledge.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Frank Sesno, CNN, Washington.
Investigators here in Washington say they've made great strides in identifying the hijackers and are casting a wide net. Let's go live to CNN Justice correspondent Kelly Arena. Kelly, I understand there's been a major development within the past hour.
Well, Wolf, justice officials have confirmed that 1 arrest warrant has been issued for a person described as a material witness. Now, it is a tactic that law enforcement is expected to employ many times in the near future to try to keep people in custody so that they can question them further for as long as they need to. The FBI has said that it issued 35 search warrants, hundreds of subpoenas, and it's conducted hundreds of interviews as part of its investigation, which has been dubbed Operation Pent Bomb. And what's more, sources say there are currently 27 people who are in INS custody. One source says the FBI has gleaned useful and helpful information, but that, quote, if there was some real concrete evidence, and someone would have been arrested by now. The FBI has received more than 36,000 leads. It's also forwarded a watch list to various authorities. Now, that lists more than 100 names of people that the FBI thinks may be helpful to provide information. If found, those people will be detained for questioning. And the Justice Department today also released the name of 19 people who have been identified as hijackers. Many of them have ties to southern Florida, and many were pilots who attended U.S. flight schools. Law enforcement sources say that most of the hijackers identified have a direct or indirect link to Osama bin Laden, but that they are not ruling out other entities which may have had a hand in Tuesday's attacks. Now, here's what we know about the hijackers. Let's start with American Airlines flight number 11, which crashed into the World Trade Center. That's the North Tower. That list includes 4 believed to be pilots, including Mohammed Atta and Walid al-Shehri. Now, Atta's car was found at Logan Airport in Boston. He received training at several flight schools in Florida. Al-Shehri also went to flight schools in Florida, and sources say lived with Atta. Now, looking at United Flight 175, which crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center, hijackers on that flight include Marwan al-Shehi, believed to be a pilot and who also lived with Mohammed Atta. On United's Flight 93, which crashed in Pennsylvania, 3 of the hijackers have ties to Florida. One, Jarahi, is believed to be a pilot. And on American Flight 77, which crashed into the Pentagon, there were 5 hijackers, some with ties in Fort Lee, New Jersey, others to California. Now, Wolf, terrorism experts say that it is safe to assume that the hijackers were low-level operatives. Terrorist organizations rarely sacrifice their high-level assets. But their identities are vital in helping to track down their associates, which could help the FBI identify terrorist cells working within the United States. Back to you.
And Kelly, briefly, is there a widespread sense among these investigators that some terrorists may still be at large here in the United States?
Well, Wolf, intelligence sources have told CNN that there is evidence that there may still be terrorists in the United States with the aim of targeting more U.S. targets. Our national security correspondent David Ensard was given this quote, that there is reason to believe that not all the terrorists are dead or in jail. A very sobering thought, Wolf.
Kelly Arena, thank you very much. Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, they're fighting to recover from Tuesday's attack while at the same time preparing for war. CNN military affairs correspondent Jamie McIntyre is there. He joins us now live. Jamie, first of all, about the president's decision to mobilize as many as 50,000 reservists. You reported this last night. Tell us what the plan is.
Well, Wolf, this is not the prelude to war, but it could be the prelude to war. What the Pentagon has asked for is authorization to call up 50,000 troops. They've initially identified 35,000 that they may need right away, including troops that would back up and support some of the fighter pilots that have been flying protective cover over the United States. The breakdown goes like this: about 10,000 Army troops, 13,000 Air Force, 7,500 Marines, 3,000 Navy personnel, and 2,000 Coast Guard. And they'll be doing everything from port operations to engineering support, and as I said, even pilots and air crews. The mission here is either to beef up the defenses of the United States, or to aid civil authorities in disaster relief. There has not yet been a call up for the purpose of mobilizing for war, but that could come.
Jamie, what about today at the Pentagon in the search and rescue operation there, the cleanup? What's going on?
Well, the death toll still stands at 190. They did recover the so-called black boxes but sources say that the flight data recorder, while was in pretty good condition, the cockpit voice recorder, which would have recorded what was said in the cockpit, apparently did not yield any significant information. The grim task of recovering the remains continues. The bodies are being brought out and taken to a military mortuary in Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, and that'll continue over the weekend.
And Jamie, update us on that story you've been reporting about the possibility that some of those terrorists may actually have been trained in the United States at military facilities?
Well, it's not clear, Wolf. Some of the names that are on that list match names of people who attended U.S. military schools under an exchange program that the U.S. has to bolster ties with other countries. Those two schools were the Air War College in Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama, and the Defense Language Academy, which is in Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. They wouldn't have gotten any classified training there. It's mostly, in the case of the language school, mostly learning another language. In the case of the Air War College, it's more about military theory and trying to inculcate some foreign students with some of the values of the U.S. military. But nevertheless, the names match. They just can't be sure it's the same persons.
Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon, thank you very much. Meanwhile, Congress has moved quickly to provide financial and moral support for the recovery and for a strong U.S. response. Joining us now, the Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman Carl Levin and the Ranking Member John Warner, who himself is a former Navy Secretary and a veteran of 2 wars. First of all, to you, Mr. Chairman, tell the American public right now how close this country is to actually beginning military operations.
Well, we don't know, and if I did know, I wouldn't say, because obviously that's the kind of information that we keep to ourselves. But we are preparing both ourselves and hopefully with a lot of other countries, because we need to do this effectively, and it can be done most effectively when that action occurs, whether it's in the short term or long term. It's most effective if it's done with other countries throughout the world who will defend civilization against this kind of action. But the war has been brought to America. We will lead, but hopefully we will find ourselves joined with civilized nations around the world, including some non-traditional allies, including Russia, hopefully would be joining with us when the time comes.
Senator Warner, I want to put some pictures up of a candlelight vigil in your home state of Virginia, nearby here in Arlington, Virginia, in Northern Virginia. As we show these pictures, I want to ask you about the nature, though, of this war, without revealing any classified information or secrets or anything like that. What should the country be prepared for as it looks down the road?
You know, I've visited that very scene behind the Pentagon where I worked for 5 years as Navy Secretary, and I was there yesterday. But to answer your question, I can best do it by telling you of a conversation I had with the President yesterday in the Oval Office. And he said, we as a nation, together with our allies, as Senator Levin said, it'll be a coalition, much like his father put together in the '91 Gulf War. We will pursue these terrorists unrelentlessly, find them, hold them accountable, and take every step necessary to deter a follow-on attack. He stressed it's going to be a long time before we achieve this. Could be months, it could be years, and it could involve a number of engagements.
Senator Levin, the Secretary of State, General Colin Powell, spoke similarly as Senator Warner just did. I want to play for you an excerpt of what he had to say today, and then we'll talk about the military ramifications of what he said. Listen to this.
The enemy is in many places. The enemy is not looking to be found. The enemy is hidden. The enemy is very often right here within our own country. And so you have to design a campaign plan that goes after that kind of enemy. And it isn't always blunt force military, although that is certainly an option. It may well be that the diplomatic efforts, political efforts, legal, financial, other efforts may be just as effective against that kind of an enemy as with military force.
What General Powell is suggesting, Senator Levin, is that this military campaign that probably is going to happen is going to be a lot different than anything we've seen before.
A lot different in many ways, including the ones that Secretary Powell talked about. But there's also a difference now from the last few wars When we went to the Balkans, there was great dispute. There was questions among our people. What are we doing there? Why aren't the Europeans doing it? There were surely questions in Vietnam. But here, there's no question. This is war brought to us on our own turf, on our homeland, against us directly. And this is a Pearl Harbor situation, but this time it's a terrorist Pearl Harbor. So we have a